Okay, so you got through the previous lesson. Hopefully you got a handle on this because I'm going to move much more quickly through this. And it's going to sound a little more lively. We're going to go to a faster jam track. Why don't you pull up your Shuffle in E jam track. I'm specifically using jam track 11, which sounds like this. We're at a tempo of 114 beats per minute. Make sure you can play your figure. 1, 2, let 3. And that you're right in the pocket. That you're playing with that authority. Make sure. Make sure you bang it out. Whatever you need to do, right? Okay. Well, in this lesson, you notice that the title is 1, flat 3, and then we have a variable. So we've changed what our second tone is. This is going to go quickly. So let's start with our 1. Then we have the flat 3. So what variables do we have for that third note? We have 5 variables because we've restricted ourselves to the minor pentatonic scale. If I choose to come back to the root, okay, typical lick, but it's strong because it's coming back to the root. 2, 3, 4. I might choose a different root. Okay, that was just dead on, no grace note, no fancy stuff. What can I do? Well, when I go, I could sweep, rake over to that, 2, 3, 4. So, because I'm set up for it, let's go through this rather slowly. You play the root with your third finger, flat it through with your first finger, and then your second finger comes over and you're already on the root up on high, and just go. And you're probably just going to rake over 3 strings unless you scoot over just a little bit more. That's just an option, right? So the rake is a cool little embellishment. It's a grace note approach. What about our lower neighbors? If 1 is our final tone, this necessitates a little technique called a reversed or descending finger roll. I'm playing that G, the flatted third, and the 12th fret right there, with my finger flattened in such a posture that's deadening the 2 adjacent strings. Then I can easily and cleanly and very smoothly get right over, whether I decide to hammer on or legato slide. Now I could assign 1 finger per note, but you need to know these finger rolls. Now this is where I'm going to branch out a little bit. If you don't know how the guitar is tuned, and I mean that in terms of intervals, you need to know this. All the strings are tuned 5 frets apart, which is the perfect fourth, except the second and third strings. That's a major third. Therefore, if you have a riff that encompasses 2 adjacent strings, the pattern stays the same. The only time it changes is when you go to the second and third strings, right? This is really evident if you look at your second E minor pentatonic scale. Let's just take this riff and move it around. All I've got to do is go, for example, down here. I've got the same 6 scale degrees, right? And then the only time it changes is when I go to the second and third strings. So before you go any further, stop the video and make sure you can play that lick on all string groups, meaning first and second, second and third, third and fourth, fourth and fifth, fifth and sixth. And be able to do all of it. Know it all of them. And try your different techniques, all the different things you need to do. Okay, now what we're doing here is we're playing, starting off, staying strictly in position, right? Within this E minor pentatonic scale, 12th position. But what if I decided to lay out the notes on 1 string? Let's go back to our just basic stock lick, where no embellishment's taking place for the destination tone. I am limited because my third note is on a different string than the second note, right? Make sense? If I put it on the same string, then do you see I'm set up to be able to use a pull-off as a grace note or a legato slide. things that I wouldn't be able to do in this position. So this goes back to, why would I need to know how to play the same thing in different places? Why do I need to know all these different scale forms? Well, it justifies it in this case, doesn't it? Okay, so make sure you practice playing this way. Same pitches, same scale degrees. Right? Okay, let's go to a different position. Let's go up here. It's starting to scream up on top of them. Sure, I can use octaves, right? I can do whatever I want. I can play it 2 octaves apart. So, as long as I'm using the same scale degrees, I'm within my formula. Okay, so that was using the root, flatted third, coming back to the root. Then we talked about the lower neighbor as a grace note. And we talked about using the upper neighbor as a... You know, you can do that sweet business if you want, but if you want the sound, you want it to be crisper and punchier, just lay it out so you use a pull-off, okay? Now the riff gets a little more interesting. If I go root, flatted third, and instead of coming back to the same root, I've got all those options. I showed you that a little earlier. Okay, let's move a little quicker here. We did root, flatted third, back to the root. If I go to the flatted third again, I've got another kind of lick, right? Right? What can we do to spice that up? Well, then you use the upper and lower neighbors of the flatted third as grace notes. Right? Upper neighbor. Or lower neighbor. Okay, let's play that. 2, 3, 4. Give me a quick... And then you start experimenting, like with just one finger. You saw what I did. I actually used a grace note on my first note. And then put some staccato in it. I told you to practice legato, right? Make sure you can do it that way. Then start putting the staccato in, and you've got all your different tools for articulation. It really breathes life into these licks. A lot of the greatest blues players knew this intrinsically. They would phrase according to the way they would sing. So experiment doing that. Okay, so you see what we're doing? We're using the flatted third as our destination tone. Let's move on. Let's use the 5 as the destination tone. Well, we end up getting a little minor triad. 2, 3, 4. Clearly a minor sound. That was using an upper neighbor as a grace note and a lower neighbor as a grace note. I'm going to go quicker on this, and you know, it's pretty important that you follow me on this, but know your scale degrees. That was an example of just using different notes as my third, as the variable, as the third note in the riff, and then creating a phrase where the listener hears this repetition. Oh, okay, because I'm using the same rhythmic idea, and melodically, I'm always starting root, flatted third, and then my third note was a variable. Then I finish it off with just some minor pentatonic, target down toward the root. That was an example of how to implement this in your playing. It'll help feed ideas to yourself. I mean, it'll help you create continuity and longer phrases. Okay, so there we had going to the 5. Let's go to the flat 7. You saw me just do it. That's a good sound. You could hammer on from the lower note for a grace note. You could pull off from the higher note. You can do slides. So I don't need to go through all these options right now. Just be aware of the flat 7 as your destination tone. So we've used the root, we've used the flat third, we used the 5th, we used the flat 7. What if we decide to use the 4th? sound, right? So you can get some nice things going here. So that's using the fourth. Make sure that you just look at an overview this way. Let's take our original riff. Root, flatted third, then where can we go? Back to the root. And in doing so, we have these other, in this area, we have those other roots, right? Then you can do your grace notes, upper and lower grace notes, hammer-ons, pull-offs, legato slides. Then we said, what if you go root, flatted third, and then back to the flatted third? Well, what do you do there? You're just repeating a note. If you need some variety, we talked about how you might want to lay it out a different way. The 5. And by the way, right there, if I go 1, flat 3, and 5 is my target, I can bend up to, right? Okay, then we said, what if we use the flat 7? And then what if we use the 4? Breaking it down like this and being able to pre-hear the notes will help you tremendously. Okay, so you see what we had in terms of the root and the flatted third being the first two notes. The variable was the third note. We went through some of the options. You should be getting a handle on this by now.